Now, hey, let's move on to Washington, D.C., where the phrase drain the swamp has taken on a whole new meaning after a sewer pipe owned by D.C. Water collapsed and sent, get this, 250 million gallons of raw sewage, that's a lot, into the Potomac River. I can almost smell it from here. But it has emerged also that the chief of D.C. Water not only oversaw $500 million in DEI contracts, but also complained when he took his job that there were too many white men running the joint.
When I arrived at DC Water, this was an organization that looked very similar to our industry. It was predominantly, white male at the top, but this was a utility that's, more than 70% people of color work at this utility.
Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more is White House reporter at the Washington Examiner, Naomi. Naomi, this story, pardon the pun, really stinks. What's going on there in D.C.? And did the D.C. Water Authority spend more time doing social justice than they did maintaining the pipes?
Well, if you didn't think DC was toxic before, you probably do now. For your So that your audience understands sort of the magnitude of this spill, I think it comes up to like 360 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of sewage has gone into the local river around the DC area, which, is not a lovely prospect. And even the president sort of weighed in on, or the White House press secretary this week sort of weighed in how Trump is actually kind of nervous that we'll have to be dealing with when he wants to celebrate the big 250th birthday of the country this summer, or in July, our time. But, what is happening now is that there's a lot of finger pointing, because obviously DC has a Democratic run mayor as well as a council. And then obviously the Maryland governor, Wes Moore, who is thought of as a presidential candidate in 2028, he's a Democrat. And so there's a lot of finger pointing about who to blame and who is supposed to be taking responsibility of that, because there's like record levels of E. coli in the water supply here now. And you probably didn't want to swim in the Potomac River beforehand, but now you definitely don't. Trump this week sort of said that he might step in and help with the Environmental Protection Agency if the governors asked nicely. So hopefully Wes Moore does that soon.
Yeah, wow, it's a stinky situation, that's for sure. Hey, Naomi, I want to move on to more serious matters, although that is a pretty serious matter right there. Specifically, the grinding lawfare that has been waged against the Trump administration for years now, where lower courts try and block everything the administration tries to do before they eventually get their way higher up the line. And there was a fascinating admission by CNN legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin in the New York Times who said, those Biden judges and others appointed by Democratic presidents have proved that the most effective resistance to Mr. Trump has come not from Democratic politicians, but rather from federal judges. This really proves a point that the left is now actively trying to use a branch of government that should be independent from politics for very political means. I think this makes them look very petty.
Well, whenever Jeffrey Toobin is in the news, I always raise my eyebrows. But this was an interesting example, because obviously the Federalist Society has become really influential in conservative circles because of this way that they have really elevated judges that sort of believe in, originalism and textualism and really interpreting the documents that the founding fathers left us. Now, when it comes to what Toobin is saying is that, when they are choosing judges, because Biden has passed more or appointed more judges in his term than Trump did in his first term. And so he was sort of saying, what is the secret ingredient here? And the idea of, these judges, maybe not being sort of, standing for something as opposed to just being against Trump. Now, the issue with that is that the opposite of originalism is sort of a living constitution and a document that you can interpret, put your sort of activism into, which is something that is, not very popular in some circles, but something that maybe Democrats might lean on more heavily if someone like Toobin gets his way with this sort of idea that he wants to amplify.
Indeed, and you're right about Jeffrey Toobin there. There's a man who certainly has lived up to his name in the past. But I wanted to talk also, just to go back to the DEI question, which I started here before. You have written a fascinating piece in your paper, The Washington Examiner, this week, about Trump's second term in this anti-DEI age, and your research showing his approach being different this time around when it comes to policies for Black Americans. Tell us what you found. I thought this was really interesting.
Well, thank you for reading. That's really nice of you. What I thought was really interesting is that the Black vote became more important for Donald Trump in this most recent election. He might not have won the whole demographic, but he won enough to keep sort of Kamala Harris from becoming president. And I thought it was interesting that despite that, we haven't seen sort of this outreach or this continued outreach to Black America. What we've seen instead is this idea that Trump's policies help all of Americans, for example, his tax cuts, for example, work that he's done with veterans. But it's really different from term one, where, we had Ye, or formerly known as Kanye West, in the White House Oval Office, sort of talking to Trump about criminal justice reform. I think you had Kim Kardashian really pushing for these release of sort of making, drug offenders that weren't violent, advocating for their release. So there was a real sort of spotlight put underneath this very sort of identity politics. But again, in this era of being anti-DEI, we've seen the opposite. And so I'm really curious to see how that plays out, before we go into the midterms, and then potentially whether this coalition that Trump has built sticks with the Republican Party going forward.
Fascinating stuff, Naomi Lim. Thank you so much for joining me, and everybody out there, read her stuff at the Washington Examiner.